Welcome to the Heroes of Fandom Top 15 Game Boy games. Last time we went over number 15 through 8, and today we're going to be going over the top 7. If you haven't seen part 1, I recommend checking that out first. This is the top 7 Heroes of Fandom Game Boy games. Number 7. When I first picked up Donkey Kong from a flea market, I didn't know what to expect. I just saw Donkey Kong on the title and figured it was a port of the arcade game. I booted it up and saw that familiar screen. Cool. I made my way through the standard levels, and you would not believe my surprise when I saw that they included the Pie Factory stage. Let me tell you, my mind was exploded. Up until this point, Nintendo had been omitting this stage because the NES version of the arcade game didn't have enough memory for 4 stages, and every subsequent release of Donkey Kong had been the NES version if we're not counting that bonus arcade game found in Donkey Kong 64. This was a very pleasant surprise. Oh, and I guess there's the whole deal of Donkey Kong giving you the old psych at the end of the game because, buddy, this is not your standard port of Donkey Kong. In fact, it's not even a traditional Donkey Kong game at all. What unfolds afterwards is a completely new adventure that barely resembles the first couple stages. It becomes more of a puzzle platformer. The object of each screen is to get the key, which will take you to the next level. Collecting Pauline's 3 items will give you a shot at a bonus round, and this makes it very easy to rack up many extra lives. Not that it really matters, because the challenge of the game comes in the form of those puzzles I just mentioned. Things start off simple enough, but towards the end of the game you'll need to be really thinking of what levers to pull, which springs to activate, and how to direct enemies out of your way. Mario can only take 1 hit, and jumping on enemies doesn't do much. You can pick up objects like in Mario Bros 2 to fight back. If you drop the key after picking it up, you can only leave it unattended for a certain amount of time before it warps back to its spawn point. There's a lot to keep track in this deceptive title. Donkey Kong would later go on to inspire the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series of puzzle platformers, but this continues to be my favorite. When it comes to porting arcade games, this is a great example of what can be done. Can you imagine what Pac-Man, Galaga, and Dig Dug would be like if it took a Donkey Kong 94 approach? Number 6. What Pokemon Red and Blue started, Pokemon Gold and Silver expanded. Better graphics, better music, better design, more content, worse battery. If you own an original cartridge, y'all know what I'm talking about. One of the upgrades from Pokemon Gen 1 to Gen 2 is that you can set an internal clock to match the real world. This means that if you play at night, you'll have the chance to catch specific Pokemon that only come out in the dark. This is awesome! Until you realize that this meant that your cartridge had to constantly be on. Having battery-backed games wasn't anything crazy at this point. You'd save your game and the battery inside your cartridge would provide just enough power to keep that information from disappearing forever. But when you have to be running a clock at real time, well, that can be a little bit more taxing. So while some of your 30-year-old NES games may barely be starting to lose their ability to save from dead batteries, many Gold and Silver players felt the heartbreak of booting up their games to see that they lost their save point years ago. Fortunately, with a little bit of soldering skills, you can install a new battery, but at this point, I'd say just buy the eShop version because you'll inevitably lose your state again. So Gold and Silver, what does it do better? Well, it's still the same Pokemon game as it was before. You still travel around fighting monsters, catching monsters, and training these monsters to fight stronger monsters. Pokemon now have genders, so you can make baby Pokemon. Pokemons can hold items to produce tons of different results. Oh, and after you beat the Elite Four, the game's not just over. You can now visit a condensed version of the area from Red and Blue and take on the gym leaders from the Kanto League. That's like a game and a half. Nowadays, that would be sold as DLC, but here it all comes with the base game. Now that's getting your money's worth. And that's pretty much why Pokemon Gold and Silver is my pick for number 6. Pretty much everything I said about Red and Blue, but bigger and better. Number 5. Speaking of expanding on and improving on the original, Wario Land 2 didn't just expand on Wario Land, it took the series in a new direction. Whereas Wario Land had strong Super Mario elements such as shrinking upon taking 1 hit and power-ups, Wario Land 2's challenge and execution is much more unique and much better. For starters, Wario can't die. You can get hit over and over, but you'll just keep on trucking. The catch is that you lose coins, and the object of every level, beyond just getting to the end, is finding the hidden treasure and solving a number puzzle at the end of each stage, which requires coins. We'll touch more on that later. Wario Land 2 demands that the player not just rush through stages, but seek out every nook and cranny for secrets which are littered everywhere. Some lead you to pockets of coins, but eagle-eyed players can find access to hidden stage exits, which can lead to branching paths in the main story or completely new areas and endings altogether. Finding every treasure in every level is less influential to the overall game as it only unlocks a minigame, but you're going to want to be sharp on that number puzzle game, as solving every single one will give the player access to the real final level, and it is by far one of the most bizarre in the entire game. And like I said, the key to it all is coins. When it comes to treasure, the more you pay, the easier it is to win, and in regards to the number puzzle, more coins reveals more tiles so you don't have to take a guess. And finally, there are the power-ups. Whereas in Wario Land 1 had more traditional power-ups in which you bust a block and then get a special item, Wario Land 2 has temporary status alternations. Get Set on Fire will send you running about, but once you're completely blazed, you'll be able to bust through fire blocks. Get Stung by a Hornet and your face will swell, sending you floating gracefully upwards. Get Squished, now you can pancake through tight corridors. Wario Land 1 may have started the spin-off series, but Wario Land 2 was the true start to what would become one of the most memorable franchises in Nintendo history. Number 4. Dragon Warrior is as classic JRPG as it gets. You pick your attack, you wait your turn, you heal, you cast magic. I never had the patience and always preferred more action-oriented games. Since 2015, my palette in games has changed dramatically, namely due to going through some amazing RPGs such as the Earthbound series and Xenoblade Chronicles, and Dragon Warrior 3 came more naturally to me than it did back then. So much so that I could not put it down. I became determined to explore everything that this game had to offer. The game starts off linear as you explore the world by foot, completing quests along the way, but all that changes when you finally get access to the boat. Now the aim is to collect the orbs that will allow you to ultimately make your way to the final boss of the game. With this boat, you can choose to go wherever you want and collect the orbs in whichever order you choose, given that you have the appropriate level to fight the enemies in each region. So much of the challenge just comes from figuring out where to go. Clues are given to you by people of the villages, and they work well enough to guide you in the right direction. Gameplay wise, Dragon Warrior 3 is generic, but only because it started many of the trends that we see today. You take control of the hero and you can select a team of 3 other chums to travel with. They can be mages, fighters, warriors, clerics, etc. This was a big deal at the time. Nowadays, it's just expected. And of course, it wouldn't be an amazing game without an amazing twist. Just like with Pokemon Gold, the end is not the end. After beating who you thought was the final boss, you are confronted by the real final boss, who is found in a completely new map, which turns out to be the same location as Dragon Warrior 1. While I wouldn't call myself a big RPG guy, I would say that Dragon Warrior 3 became one of my favorite games of all time, and that's saying a lot considering I'm not an RPG guy. Number 3. When it came down to choosing between the Oracle games and Link's Awakening, I had to do some serious thinking. The Oracle games are big and epic. Link's Awakening is much more simple. It's a much more traditional Zelda experience in line with that of Link to the Past. You got a set number of dungeons to explore and bosses to kill before you reach the big baddie to save the day. But sometimes less is more, and there's a reason why Link's Awakening was remade for the Switch. It tells a compelling story and builds a much more interesting world than the Oracle games. We talk in Majora's Mask level of interesting. Whereas other Zelda games take place in Hyrule and involve stopping a giant evil pig to save a princess, Link's Awakening takes place on a mysterious island and you're never quite sure what exactly happens at the end or why you do the things you do. I mean, yeah, the game tells you that you need to do these things to leave this island, but it never really explains how everything works, so the ending is left to personal interpretations, which I absolutely like. This results in one of the most beloved Zelda games ever that doesn't need 2 games to reach console level quality. It's the perfect blend of puzzles and action. It also stands out for having some of the most unique elements of a Zelda game. One of the power-ups allows you to jump, something that isn't seen in many Zelda games. There are side-scrolling portions with Goombas from Super Mario Bros., talking animals, chain chomps, the ability to unequip your sword and replace it with a different item. This game had it all on top of being a great Zelda game. My only complaint, and it's very minor, is that the final boss isn't anything special compared to other Zelda games. In fact, many of the bosses borrow elements from Link to the Past, which is totally fine by me. This game already offers so much that I didn't even miss an epic final boss. The story itself more than makes up for it. Number 2. How do you take this, and squeeze it down onto this by borrowing the general design of the original 8-bit Metal Gear games. While most people in the States were first introduced to the Metal Gear series on PlayStation 1, and a couple were turned off to the series by that terrible NES port / disowned stepchild sequels, in Japan, 2 Metal Gear games were released for the MSX home computer. The style was top-down and nowhere near as complicated as things would get. This is the way Metal Gear for the Game Boy would tell its story. Lengthy voiceover cutscenes would be replaced with text conversations. Despite being called Metal Gear Solid and having similar box art to the PlayStation Classic, this is not a port, but instead a non-canon sequel to the original Metal Gear. This is just as confusing as it sounds, except that in Japan it made a little bit more sense because the title was Metal Gear Ghost Babel, so at least you knew it wasn't supposed to be a Metal Gear Solid port. Gameplay wise, it's up to you, Solid Snake, to infiltrate and take down enemies without being seen. You get all sorts of gadgets to accomplish this. A big difference from the home console Metal Gear games is that the areas are divided by stages, which fits the portable nature of the game. You are ranked after each stage based on how fast you completed the area and whether or not you were seen, which gives the game a lot of replay value. Story-wise, it's just all over the place, so I won't even try to condense it. The point is, bad guys got a big weapon and it's up to you to stop them to save the world. And despite being a game rated E for everyone, it hits on some pretty heavy themes. The bosses are all messed up in their own ways. This is easily one of my most favorite Metal Gear games of all time, and it's just because it's fun. What drew me to the series was the story, but with this game, story is okay to take a backseat to the gameplay because of the platform. Not too challenging, but it's also not a walk in the park. It's a shame this game never got released on the 3DS eShop. Alright, before we get to number 1, here are some honorable mentions. Metroid 2 Return of Samus has not aged well at all. I personally like it, but with basic graphics such as these and no map system, it's easy to get lost. Which is a shame because Metroid 2 is such a pivotal moment in the series. It's not so bad that I'll skip it when I play through the Metroid games, but I'd be lying if I said this game didn't have glaring problems. I personally enjoy it, but it's not top 15 material. Little Mermaid 2 Pinball Frenzy is fun. Like, I prefer this over Kirby Pinball, Pokemon Pinball, and Mario Pinball Land is just garbage, so it's no contest. It's got 2 boards and physics that just feel right. I feel like I can get the ball to go where I want. And if you're skilled enough, you can unlock bonus minigames. Like, holy cow, I would have never guessed that a Little Mermaid pinball game could be this good. Speaking of, Little Mermaid on the Game Boy is awesome. The music, the gameplay, the stages, Capcom did such a great job. By far one of my most favorite games ever, just not quite top 15. Man, what is it with Little Mermaid and Game Boy? And finally, the Heroes of Fandom #1 Game Boy game is... I'm sorry, but yeah, all 3 Wario Land games are on the list, and at the top of it all is Wario Land 3, the best Game Boy game I have ever played. It's got everything I mentioned on this list. Addicting gameplay, massive levels to explore, puzzles, challenge. The only thing it doesn't have is a post-game twist, but it's already beefed up with content, it doesn't even need one. The big difference between 2 and 3 is that now when you take a hit, there is no punishment whatsoever and you don't lose coins, which, by the way, you don't need as much as in 2. Wario Land 3 is pure exploration bliss. Getting hit can still be a nuisance because you get knocked back, which can lead to some serious setbacks in terms of progression. Enemies are obstacles as opposed to game enders. It's amazing how a game where you can't die still offers challenge. Each level has 4 hidden treasures, and finding them all will depend on what power-ups you have and what other treasures you have found. For example, when you start off the game, you're pretty much missing all of the abilities from Wario Land 2, such as the ability to ground pound and swim. But as you gain these abilities back, you are able to explore new areas of previously accessed levels to gain new treasures. Some of the treasures cause events to occur in other stages, such as causing new paths to appear or new stages entirely. And on top of all that, there are 8 music coins to find in each stage, so there is a ton to do in this game. Bosses are unique and creative, as are the stages. You go from forests to caves to cities to deserts to volcanoes to the clouds. Returning from Wario Land 2 are the status power-ups, as well as some new ones like being able to turn into a vampire. Wario Land 3 is what the Game Boy was made for, and my personal choice for the #1 Game Boy game. So that was my list for Heroes of Fandom. I would really like to know what your personal top games for the console are. I enjoy reading other people's opinions because sometimes it gets me reevaluating my own list and it helps me find some gems I may have overlooked. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I'm Pollo for Heroes of Fandom. Until next time.